Welcome back to Call Time with Katie Birenboim. I'm so happy you're tuning in, especially because today's episode is a special experimental episode. So I decided that every couple of episodes, I wanted to do this special episode focusing on a specific show that I loved. I think that was partially because when I was doing a version of this show with Berkshire Theater Group, I really loved the fact that I was able to focus on specific texts. And of course, now it's wonderful that I get to do these large career spanning interviews with people who are so accomplished and so exceptional, but I wanted to split the difference and find a happy medium and sometimes be able to focus on shows specifically. So hopefully you will enjoy this. Bear with me as it's sort of a new form and a new style for me. So hopefully you'll like it. So once I decided that I was going to focus on particular shows, the first one that came to my mind obviously was Frank Loesser's Guys and Dolls. Now, those of you who may be watching, who may know me at all, know that I'm obsessed with this show. And it's not just a normal affection for an old musical. It's more like an actual honest to God obsession. So I wanted to go through and really figure out and articulate some of the ways and reasons why this show that's over 70 years old is obsession worthy today. So first, some background. Guys and Dolls has music and lyrics by the great Frank Loesser, who also wrote one of my other favorite shows, The Most Happy Fella. Maybe we'll do an episode on that. And it has a book by Joe Swerling and Abe Burrows. It did a tryout in Philadelphia before transferring to the 46th Street Theater, now the Richard Rodgers, on Broadway in 1950. It was directed by the great George S. Kaufman. Can you imagine a more stacked creative team? I certainly can't. It ran for 1,200 performances, which was a lot back then. You know, they didn't have like the Phantoms and the Les Mises that are running for 10,000 performances. And it won Tony Awards for Best Choreography, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Supporting Actress, and Best Musical. In fact, it was also chosen to win the Pulitzer Prize that year. But because of Abe Burrows' supposed communist tendencies, let's not forget this was the height of the McCarthy era, the Pulitzer Committee decided simply not to award one that year, which I think is very interesting and something I didn't know about the show before I started to do some research. So all of that being said, it's based on a series of short stories by Damon Runyon, who wrote about post-prohibition New York City. The show is specifically based on two Damon Runyon short stories, The Idol of Miss Sarah Brown and Blood Pressure. Since then, the show has been made into a brutally miscast 1955 movie. You can come for me in the comments if you feel differently about that movie. It's been revived on Broadway 3 times and produced all over the world. In fact, research suggests that Guys and Dolls is one of the single most produced musicals of all time. It's sort of like that saying you may have heard about how at any given moment there is a high school production of Oklahoma going on. The same could be said of Guys and Dolls. But let's break it down. I wanted to go through and really in a methodical way figure out why so many people, including me, are obsessed with this show. In fact, many people describe it as the greatest musical ever written. And I think that could be fair to say. So why all the hype? First, I think it's important to focus on the music. When Guys and Dolls was written, let's not forget, it was still the era when musical theater songs were popular. In fact, many popular artists would re-record the songs that had come out in musicals and put them out on albums or as singles, and people would actually listen to them, you know, in their homes and on their record players, not just people like me. In fact, Broadway songs at that time would chart. They would chart the popular music charts. Can you imagine that now? I think a big reason for that is the fact that the music itself was really exceptionally good. No offense to contemporary musicals. There are a ton of contemporary musicals that I love. Again, you can come for me in the comments, but I do think that a lot of these strong, quintessential golden age musicals were strong musically in a way that many contemporary musicals are not as much, and had real melodies. They had singable, catchy melodies. And when I think about Guys and Dolls, especially the music, I don't think there's a single skip song in the entire track. And I say skip song, a lot of theater people know what that means. And it's exactly what it sounds. It's the song that you skip when you're listening to the cast album all the way through. And there are many musicals where there are several songs I skip. And really in Guys and Dolls, there's only one, and that's Follow the Fold. And to be honest, that is designed to be a skip song. It tells you something about the characters that are singing it. I'm worried that this episode may end up being just a let's trash Sarah Brown the whole episode, and it won't be, but bear with me for that. It's designed to be a skip song. The characters are supposed to be being presented as boring in a specific way, which leads me to my next point, which is that in addition to being melodically rich and catchy and interesting, and having great textures, the music and the songs also usually were dramatically important and told you something about the characters. After each song, I feel like you understand something new, either about the characters, their relationship to one another, or the plot. So let's go through even just the first act of Guys and Dolls and think about the function of each of these songs in the act. I'm putting on my little dramaturg hat. So first we have Fugue for Tin Horns, which of course is when the three gamblers get up and sing their little round of songs. And that, I think, sets up the world of the play, both musically and intellectually. Then we have Follow the Fold, which, as I said, sets up who Sarah Brown and her people are. We get like an inkling of what the conflict is going to be, because if the Fugue for Tin Horns guys are sort of that way, and then we're introduced to the Follow the Fold, how are they going to, butt heads? Then we have The Oldest Established, which sets up the essential problem, or I would say one of the essential problems of the show, which is that the police is cracking down on gambling and they need a place to host their crap game. And it sets up Nathan Detroit's character and function, that he sets up the game and finds a place. That's his job. And then we get to I'll Know, which sets up the love story and that essential conflict again that was hinted at before between the gamblers, the sort of inveterate, seedy side of New York City, and the nice, the educated, the suburbia side of New York, and that's Sarah Brown. And again, you get an inkling of the love story too. It sets it up. It's one of these great golden age, what I like to call, and what I've learned are conditional love songs. You know, it's like, if I loved you from Carousel, people will say we're in love in Oklahoma. It's the same thing here. I'll know when my love comes along. Anytime you hear any kind of like conditional phrase about love, your headlights should be going on in your brain saying this is the main romantic pair in the show and they are going to fall in love. So we have I'll Know. And then we travel to a different world entirely, which is the Hot Box, and we get Bushel and a Peck. And of course, that sets up Adelaide and her world. We get some of her personality, what she does for a living. We then go to Adelaide's Lament, which I will certainly talk about later. I think it's one of the greatest tunes and lyrics ever written for the stage. But we get her essential conflict, her and Nathan's essential conflict in the show, that Nathan won't actually marry her, even though they've been engaged for 14 years. Then we get the actual title song, Guys and Dolls. And I think that placement is really interesting dramatically. Basically, I think people think of this song as fluff, but it comes right after Adelaide's Lament, and maybe it elucidates on that theme and perhaps gives us a reason as to why Nathan has not married her. Maybe it's peer pressure from his bros. And then the show just ramps up from there, and we get Havana, which literally takes us to Cuba. We literally travel through that song and gets Sarah drunk enough to alleviate her inhibitions, which leads us to If I Were a Belle, My Time of Day, and I've Never Been in Love Before. And that's the end of the first act. So as you see, literally every song has a dramatic function, either in terms of setting up character development or getting us from point A to point B. And that's just, there's no smarter theater making, in my opinion. And that's sort of the head aspect of why the music is so good. But there's also the heart aspect. And I think about all of these different textures and feelings that are going on musically in the show, which leads me to and makes me think of my first exposure to the show. So I had never seen it or obviously performed in it when I was little, but my first exposures to it were on these really long car rides with my parents. I sound like I'm 1,000 years old. In my day, when I was growing up in the late 90s, you got in the car and your whole family had to agree on a CD that you were going to listen to beginning to end. And in my family, it was either the Beatles' One album or the 1992 Broadway revival of Guys and Dolls, which to me is like a sacred text equivalent. And so when I was thinking about this show, especially musically, I kept thinking about this album and how special and almost magical it was that I had never laid eyes on this show, any production. Obviously, I'd never seen any version of it. And yet, from hours and hours of listening to this perfect cast album in the car, I understood completely what it was and was able to fall in love with it from the music alone. So for that, and for some more information on that, I wanted to talk with my good friend, Robert Frost, music director and voice teacher extraordinaire, specifically about why the music in Guys and Dolls is so special, and especially in the 92 revival cast album and everything that went into that, the orchestrations, the dance arrangements, etc. Well, welcome to the wonderful Robert Frost, not the poet. I'm sure you get that all the time, but
Never. Nobody's mentioned that.
No, I'm the first one to make the joke in history. Do you want to briefly introduce yourself to our viewers?
Yeah, totally. My name is Robert Frost, as your gracious host already said. I'm a freelance music director in New York City, which means I'm largely unemployed at the moment. And I also am on adjunct voice faculty at NYU, and I teach musical theater voice through Tisch.
Thank you. I'm so excited to talk with you, especially about this topic, because as a non-musical person, although I think I'm musical, but as a person who doesn't read music particularly well, doesn't play an instrument particularly well, I feel like it's rare that people even notice the orchestrations of a musical. And so I think it's kind of funny that someone like me and many of my other friends who are like me have really noticed and comment on the orchestrations for this show. So my first question for you is, why do you think that is? What makes these so special and so noticeable even to a non-musical person?
I think I think even with the original, right, it's sort of that seminal sound we identify with, like a big golden age musical comedy, right? Just out the gate.
And some of these shows now don't have, like, what used to be the standard size of an orchestra for a musical?
I was trying to look that up, and I actually don't have a number for that, but it was big.
That we know. And now they're like, okay, we have a piano, a guitar, and drums, and that's it.
Yeah. They're like, and it's Broadway. Good luck, everybody. Like, okay, okay.
But I interrupted. Keep going.
Oh, no, it's this huge sound, and I think looking at that 92 revival specifically, that's so, what I think actually for a lot of people, when I was talking to people about it, is actually sort of the seminal recording that they reference when they know the show. That's what they listen to. And it's one of those things where it so beautifully captures these like really. Can we cuss on this show? Do people cuss on this show?
People have, yeah. I may cut it, but we'll see.
Okay. I want to keep this answer so I won't cuss. They have these fire dance arrangements that are unbelievable. I mean, it's like so exciting and it's so beautifully captured. And I think like to our modern ears, they're also short. So if you listen to like older dance arrangements or orchestrations, they're sometimes very long. They don't always record the whole thing, but these like it feels like a movie. It goes by so quickly, and it's so you never lose interest in it. So I think it's like a great example of zhuzhing up a already classic show in a way that feels so clear and fun.
I should go back, and also for a lay person who may not necessarily know, can you explain what an orchestration is, first of all, and I'm sure you have knowledge of this, what the process is first for initial orchestrations of a musical, and then for reorchestrations when you're doing a revival, like the 1992 production was in this case.
Totally. So I think it's useful. There's sort of I guess maybe 4 components that are helpful to know, because in a case like this, you're sort of dealing with a few things. If you look at the playbook credits for this show, it says orchestrations by. It's got your original orchestrators, and that would be, I'm looking it up, George Bassman and Ted Royal and Michael Starobin. So that revival, when we say like reorchestration, that really means taking those original orchestrations from the original Guys and Dolls, and really in a case like this, you're maintaining like the structure of them, and you're pretty much just fitting it to a new sized pit, but you're not changing them, right? So you're tweaking them. You're like reorchestrating a little bit, but the sound remains the same, right? You may be dealing with like slightly different the number of players, but it's the same orchestrations pretty much on the page. And a bulk of this show actually maintains a lot of those original orchestrations, specifically for songs that are not dance numbers, and then overture and entr'acte, right? So then you have new orchestrations for a lot of stuff. And at this point, I think it's helpful to clarify. So first step, I think, is like arrangement. So you see dance arrangements by, right? What that means is someone who like arranges the song and lays out the structure of it, but doesn't necessarily sometimes apply it to like instruments, but says, here's the shape of the thing. And often, we'll have a hand in saying, just depending on the collaboration, we'll have a hand in saying, trumpets here, maybe a loose sketch of orchestrations. But they're really putting it together, often in collaboration with a choreographer, right? In like pre-production. So the dance arranger, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. And it's just so fascinating because, I mean, I know this, but I don't think the average person knows this. That is an entirely separate person from the composer. And
yeah. Oh, yes.
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, the dance arrangements, I feel like the dance arrangements that I can think of sort of take the melody of the song proper that the composer wrote and expands on them and sort of goes wild with them. So I think it's so fascinating that it's an entirely different person or set of people than who wrote the music for the show.
Totally. And you're so right. They are normally taking the composer's ideas,
right,
to make as a jumping off point. And then the orchestrator will and sometimes there's actually explicitly dance music by, so that's actually a person who composes new material. But then the orchestrator will take that arrangement and apply it and write out the parts for all the instruments, right? And they'll say, okay, great. So here the flutes will take this line, or the brass will take this section, or whatever. I mean, that's a very simplified version, but yeah.
What do you think makes someone a good orchestrator or dance arranger as opposed to a good composer?
Oh, that's a great question. I think well, I guess this applies to both, but I think particularly what people who are dancers and orchestrators are really incredible at is creating, particularly dance arrangers, is like finding an arc to the story for musical theater. I'm talking about, right? Mm. That it's actually, they set up a very clear story, and to the point of Guys and Dolls, it's like I never get bored at any point along this journey because there's variety, but it doesn't feel too busy. And then I think like an orchestrator, that applies to a composer as well, but to an orchestrator, I think in a lot of ways it's the same thing, and it's knowing what story you're telling or what tone you're using, and how you shift between instruments to create that tone or that texture in a way that's like a whole other story within the musical, I think, right? And how the orchestration works to serve as either commentary or a character arc, like in conjunction with the character. So I think it's like how someone who really knows their voice, the voice of the orchestrations within the piece, and can bring out all kinds of colors within that to do their job.
It's funny you mentioned storytelling within a dance break moment, because one of the numbers that I think of that I think just the music really tells a story in is the number Havana, which is one of my favorite songs in the show, truly only because of the dance arrangements and the orchestrations. So I'm curious, first of all, do you share that love of that song? And second of all, what your favorite orchestration songs are within Guys and Dolls, particularly the 92 revival?
I totally share that view of Havana. It's so clear, even if you're not, which I think is amazing about these orchestrations and thinking of Havana in particular. Obviously, it would be enhanced if you saw it with the staging and the choreography, but you listen to Havana and you can tell what is going on just from the music alone. Like after she finishes the sequence of drinks, you have this like descending kind of figure, and all of a sudden you're in this like kind of corny, like that's Amore, but the like fake Latin version. And it's like so good. It's like so obviously now we're like in her head and like this schmaltzy music is playing, and it's so good. And then the dancing sequence is clear, and then it's like, then there's the fight. And so all of a sudden it's like so chaotic music. It never loses the clarity of the storytelling. And frankly, they make it like very obvious, which I think is great for a show like Guys and Dolls, where there's not subtlety.
No, these are larger than life characters, and therefore the stories that even the dance and the orchestrations are telling should also be larger than life. Which of the songs from the 92 revival were new orchestrations, just so we have a sense?
It's fascinating because some moments, they kind of interweave a little bit. So for the bulk of the dance breaks, that's normally a new orchestration for most of the songs. But sometimes, so like an example is the beginning of the Crapshooters dance, and it may actually be transition music when they go into the sewer.
So good, by the way, which is the descending. I mean, what could be
this chromatic descending thing? Yeah. Yeah, it's so good. That's original to the show. But then when they get into the Crapshooters dance, most of that is, well, it goes back and forth. A lot of it's new, though. But some of it is original, including my favorite, the woodblock dice thing.
What's that?
So good. Near the end of the Crapshooters dance, the woodblock does the dice in the clear. When we were playing all of the orchestra. So that's a very long answer. So here's the list. Runyon Land, that's pretty much, I think, all new. Bushel and a Peck, actually a lot of that is, the dance arrangement is new. And then I think actually maybe the first verse that's solo, I think, is the original. This is just from listening, so nobody quote me on this. But then that ending in the playoff, that's new. Havana, all new. I think mostly there may be a section of the dialogue that's original. The Entr'acte and Take Back Your Mink, that's new. Oh, it's so good too because the original Entr'acte is like 3 songs. It's like, I don't know. It's like the typical thing, right? Where it's like, here's a reminder of what you've heard. This one, they just do If I Were a Bell for like a minute, and then they roll into Take Back Your Mink, and it's so good.
And it's an exciting mix of like diegetic music because it's like a jazzed up, fun version of If I Were a Bell that could be played in the what is it? The hot
in the
box?
club. The hot box, yeah.
Yeah.
It's only two more. It's Crapshooter's Dance is the big one. And then just the tail end of Sit Down, but I think it's just a vocal rearrangement because instead of singing that sort of final play out, sit down, you rock it, sit down, they do this like spoken thing.
Yes.
Where they all kind of, say, and I only imagined how difficult, sit down on the boat, yeah. And you can like sort of hear everybody being like, what's my rhythm again? But I think I think the rest of that song is pretty straight ahead to the original orchestrations. But that's the list.
Which of the songs with new orchestrations, or which of the new orchestrations are your favorite?
Havana, and then I'm gonna eat my shorts, Bushel and a Peck.
Wow, I really got to you. And my follow-up to that, which is sort of similar to my question about, what makes a good composer versus what makes a good dance arranger or orchestrator, I would hedge a bet that your favorite songs in the show are not those songs.
No.
Right. So what do you think are like the main differences then when you're looking for a favorite song versus a favorite dance break or favorite orchestration?
Gosh, what a good question. I think in the case of a show like this, it becomes about, for me, like favorite song. Well, I guess there's a few things. It's melody and what it's doing in the show, right?
Yeah.
So I think how it's serving the purpose of the story and how effectively it does that. And even when, like, most of these shows work as standalone songs. Most of these songs work as standalone songs. I would say, I think top 3 favorite songs in this show, I can't even pick one, are Sit Down, You're Rocking the Boat, because, of course, I think it's one of like the best vocal arrangements. Oh, do you not love that song?
This is maybe bad, but I often skip it when I listen to the album.
Wow. Oh, it's one of my favorites.
People are different. It's a great song, but
people are different. And my other two, and maybe I'm biased because as a music director, it's like the most fun song to teach and direct, right? But then my other two are My Time of Day, which top 5 songs in musical theater for me, and If I Were a Bell.
Gorgeous choices. I should ask you have. I believe you have, but have you music directed this show?
I've music directed the show twice, and I was also in a high school production as Sky Masterson.
So you got to sing My Time of Day.
Bingo.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I can't leave out Adelaide Zement either. Again, also top 5 musical theater songs.
Oh, yeah, completely.
No question.
I should ask, since you say that you music directed Guys and Dolls twice, as a music director, thinking a bit more broadly now, what are your favorite things about teaching the music to Guys and Dolls, and what are your favorite things musically about the show?
Oh, I think it's a show that, as you know, it's like a tank in that it just works. The jokes all work, right? So it's the best thing about it, I think, teaching it is you're like, actually kind of just do this and trust your instincts, and it works. Like, it's kind of easy to teach because the jokes all land. The vocal arrangements are phenomenal. Like, Luck Be a Lady, Oldest Established. I mean, the hot box stuff really serves its purpose, but it's like all unison, as it should be. Like, the vocal arrangements are so fun to teach, and it's great too because it really is such a seminal, like, old school musical comedy. It's like crisp and clear and funny. Like, I love teaching stuff like that, and it's so, because it's like it's all there, and if you get that sharpness, it just works like gangbusters. Another great Adelaide song that I think is sort of a sneak attack great dance arrangement is when they're singing Take Back Your Mink. They add all these little flourishes that are not in the original, which I know are going with choreography, I'm sure, of like taking off the clothes, but they have all these amazing accents. Like the first one, Take Back Your Mink, trombones, boom, take back your, take back the hat. And I'm like, oh my God, this is so good. Again, clear.
It's so good. And I'm so glad you brought up those specific examples. And when we talked about the start of the crapshooters dance with the descending is, I think, one thing that, as we've said, the orchestrations can do really well is paint a really specific image in your mind. So again, like if you're a kid and you've never seen the show and you're listening to Take Back Your Mink and you hear the sound of like something coming off, you can context clues, you can tell what's going on. And I also think, as you said, it's a musical comedy. They sort of act like sound effects in places.
Yeah. There's many times I think even in like, well, especially thinking of like Bushel and Peck, it feels like so much of the reorchestration, whether it's like adding this like hilarious glockenspiel or adding like squawky sort of trumpet, it feels at some points you're like, oh, you're not only are you have this like really exciting dance, but you're also like, and we're on the farm, and that's how you know.
Yes, exactly. I'm glad you brought up Bushel and Peck too, because something I should mention too is I feel like, again, non-musical sort of lay people, when they listen to these orchestrations, I can usually tell when something is piano or guitar, trombone or whatever. But there are some sounds in really exciting orchestrations that I'm like, what the heck is that? Like, as you said, the glockenspiel in Bushel and Peck, where the song starts with like,
like, I hope it's Glock. Someone's gonna say it's xylophone, and I'll be wrong, but I think it's glockenspiel.
Right. Well, get us in the comments on YouTube. But personally, I never knew what that was, and I was like, "What? How did they create that amazing specific sound?"
That to me is the like best skill of the orchestrator, right? It's like creating a texture or like a, because it's so. I think they do it so deftly in the show where you're like, it like goes so quickly sometimes between instruments, and you're like, oh, but it's all about like that texture we're hearing, right? That it's so exciting, and the clarity of that, even if you don't, the skill of like how that's done is so technical, but it's amazing because it's like at the end of the day, we're just hearing a really exciting song.
Yeah, in some ways I feel like it combines like composing with what's it called when you in old radio plays, when there'd be the person who would make all the sound effects.
Oh, Foley, the Foley person.
I feel like it combines Foley with composing in a weird way.
Totally.
Is there anything else you feel like we've missed or haven't discussed?
I think the only thing worth doing is shouting out, because the Michael Servin's statement's there, and then I realized if you go further in the credits, we've got dance music was by Mark Hummel for the 92 revival. So the dance music composed by Mark Hummel. Crapshooter's dance orchestrated by Michael Gibson. And then it's unclear what role he had, but when I asked about getting the arrangements, I said, especially for Havana, Michael Servin said, oh, Danny Trube had a big hand in that. I don't exactly know what that means, if he did the orchestrations, but he like ghost wrote them, unclear. But shouting out those people who were like the larger team responsible.
I think that's so important, especially because, you know, everyone knows Frank Loesser, Guys and Dolls, obviously genius status, but those of us who have like a true cult fan following of the show, who are like, oh, the orchestration at the start of the crapshooters dance, like, those are the people that we need to thank and hold in our hearts for this.
That's right.
Special moment. Well, Robert, truly I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours about this show. This was so fun. And now I'm going to go listen to the 92 cast recording. Sorry, I can't play any of it. Sad.
Me too. Everybody go to Spotify and listen to it.
Robert is the best, and that was so informative, even for me. So hopefully it was informative for you. But the next aspect of Guys and Dolls that I wanted to explore, and one of the reasons why I think many of us are so obsessed with it, and certainly a reason why I am so obsessed with it, which I mentioned earlier, is that it is one of the most produced shows in community and high school theater programs across the country. Many books, including a book by my dear friend and mentor, Stacey Wolf, have been written about the value of doing theater when you're young and how it influences the rest of your life. And I wanted to explore why it is that Guys and Dolls is so popular in this youth setting. And so for that question, I thought it would be really fun to do a quick interview with my dear friend, the incredible writer Dan Froot, who was famously the Nathan Detroit to my Adelaide in our 2012 high school production. Welcome, Dan. I'm so happy to have you on the show. Would you like to introduce yourself to the viewers?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Daniel Froot. Since high school, I have moved away from the stage and transitioned, I guess, into something slightly more behind the scenes. I've been working as a writer and producer in independent film, particularly in emerging media like augmented and virtual reality.
So my first question is whether you have, this is sort of a fun one, whether you have any fun and or funny memories of doing that show from that time.
Absolutely. I think the first funny memory so this was our senior year. Everybody was into college and I certainly was enjoying what I guess is called a senior slump to a certain extent. And so I have a distinct memory of one day a little bit late on in the process, our director basically gathering everybody and saying, and so there were a few seniors or a few seniors in key roles in the shows, and we were kind of musical theater stalwarts, I guess, at our high school, and so Woody gathered everybody, and basically he took
incredible high school theater director.
Yes, yes, exactly. So Woody gathered everybody and basically stood Katie up and was like, everybody look at Katie. She is a professional. She is off book. She knows her lines. She's been off book since like the first day. She's perfectly rehearsed in all her songs. She's clearly been doing work outside of rehearsal, and just basically, it gave you this this like long and wonderful list of accolades, and then basically kind of insinuating that the other seniors were not the people to model yourself after, because we were clearly not as prepared, and the show was fast approaching. So that was really great, and I think it clearly showed why you actually went into performing as a part of your career. So
it's funny that you've mentioned that story to me in the last year or so a couple of times, and I truly have no memory of that experience. So I'll take your word for it. I clearly blocked it out because I was embarrassed. And also, to be clear, I was off book from day one because
I wanted to tell Woody, it's literally because Katie has been preparing for this role for her entire life.
I'm curious too, having done the show in high school, what do you like most about the show? What do you think is special about the show?
I guess what I think is so great about it is how goofy it manages to be while still maintaining such a strong heart. I mean the story between, so I went into this show, I went into auditions for this show saying I want to be Nathan Detroit. I didn't grow up, I knew the songs from Guys and Dolls, but I grew up on musical theater, but Guys and Dolls was not one of the shows that was a big deal in my household growing up. But I obviously I knew the music, and then I watched it in preparation. I guess I watched the movie probably, which, by the way, truly hilarious casting of Marlon Brando in the more musical or musically significant role, and Frank Sinatra is Nathan Detroit, the man who's not really a good actor. Um,
Same.
Yeah, it's truly one of the like wildest moves I've ever seen. But I guess you have to have Sky Masterson be pretty, so toss Marlon Brando in there.
I guess I watched it recently on TV because it was just like playing on TV at home, and I hadn't watched it since I prepped for a high role in high school, and I was shocked again by like literally it seems like if they switched the casting it would have been okay.
Like 20 million times better because Marlon Brando. Yeah, well, so sorry. So I was prepped for the auditions by literally just watching the source material, like watching the movie. I was like, oh my God, I want to be Nathan Detroit so badly because there is this absolutely gorgeous love story at the center of it, but he's an absolute goof, like a bumbling gambler. And I just think it's so funny. I will say, I also grew up, while I didn't grow up, with Guys and Dolls as part of like the musical theater, canon that I was raised on. I did grow up reading Damon Runyon novels or short stories, I guess I would say. And I absolutely adore Damon Runyon. And I would read my great uncle Marty got me a book of these Damon Runyon short stories. And it literally to this day sits next to my bed, in a little alcove in my childhood bedroom. And I loved those stories so much. I loved that weird, fast talking, law skirting world. And I, Nathan Detroit obviously is in some of those stories. And I just knew that I needed to do that role. I think part of it was because not just because I loved, what a silly character he is, and saw the potential for like really hamming it up to a certain extent in that role, but I think also partly because so this was going to be my last show in high school. I really didn't know like how much more I would be acting after high school. So I knew that that when I was up at Wesleyan, I was going to be doing like some student produced theater, but I really wasn't sure how much of that was in my future. I wanted to do something which felt memorable and really gave me kind of a challenge. Reading the Sky Masterson role, it just seemed kind of like this slightly more cookie cutter leading man narrative, like just a real archetype. And while I think you can also you might also be able to call Nathan Detroit an archetype, I find him to be a much more exciting one.
I'm really glad you mentioned though the contrast between the Sky Masterson role and the Nathan Detroit role, because I assume I will be shooting this later, but I assume I will be talking and have talked a lot about my preference for the Nathan Adelaide couple over the Sky Sarah couple. And obviously
they're boring.
And obviously some of that is biased because that's a couple that
because you were born to play Adelaide.
But even before I played,
you came out of the womb singing "You Promised Me This." You promised me that.
Exactly. But I'm curious for your take. What do you? First of all, as someone who is familiar with musical theater, do you usually prefer the sort of secondary funny couple over the romantic leads, or is it that unique to Guys and Dolls, do you think?
Well, actually, it's funny that you should that earlier you mentioned the Comedy of Errors, which we were in middle school, because when we were doing that show, I auditioned and I loved from reading it from doing a scene in an acting class in middle school. I loved the character of Dromio of Ephesus, who, if you know the play, is one of the, I guess, principal characters, but is it antithesis or antipholus?
Antipholus.
Antipholus. Yeah. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. The antipholi, the two antipholus characters are a little bit more principal than the Dromio characters, who are their servants. And I, when I auditioned, the guy who was directing the show said, I would really like to have you try doing one of the Antipholus characters, I think you could do that and you do a really good job. And my answer was basically like, I kind of find them a little bit boring, and and in this scenario, the Dromio characters were more jokers and goofy and kind of buffoons. So whether or not I'm conflating myself with a buffoon, I just found that a lot more interesting, even though it was a smaller role. So I guess that is something that has happened before in my experience with musical theater, that I kind of veer towards the I guess more exciting, less archetypical characters in my mind. But another way of putting that would just be like, I like being comic relief, which is archetypical in and of itself. So
yes, a very simple answer is like, you get to be so much funnier in the Adelaide Nathan than the Sarah Sky track. But I do think that a lot of people, as you say, gravitate toward the bigger role. And I think certainly on paper, the Sarah Sky couple is the bigger couple, but almost always, not just in our production, but almost always, I feel like the Adelaide and Nathan characters steal the show.
Absolutely. Not just in our production, but certainly in our production.
And the show is one of the most produced shows in the country nationally.
Yeah.
But that's particularly true in high school theater programs. And as someone who obviously did it in high school, I'm curious why you think that is. Why do you think it's always the choice for a high school theater department in particular?
I do think that the thing about that show is that it does offer, like, you can kind of do Guys and Dolls with like as many people as you want, I think, because there's so many opportunities, like within the crowds and of what is it,
well, the gamblers, and then there's like the parishioners, quote unquote.
Yeah, the parishioners. Sorry, yes, that's what that's the word I was looking for. Yeah, exactly. So you've got the like those two groups that you can fill out with as many people as you need to a certain extent. I mean, but I have to imagine that there's just something about for directors that's so silly about dressing up children like like mid 20th century gamblers. I think that's probably what, like, a big piece of it is just that it's goofy as can possibly be.
I think you're right. I was just about to say that you're totally right, that part of the whole deal when you do the show is the outlandish, colorful costumes, and you're not really leaning into like realism per se.
Yeah.
The whole point is that it's supposed to look like the illustrations of a Damien Runyon short story. But also, when you were talking, I couldn't help but think about how funny it is whatever high schooler is cast ever as like the older character, like the guy who sings More I Cannot Wish You. What's that character's name in the show?
I have absolutely no idea.
But
I don't even know if I could have told you when we were in it, but sorry.
But that song, yeah. It's the old man, and there's something that will never not be funny to me about like a high schooler in old age makeup.
Yes. always truly hilarious with the spray, like with the frosted gray hair.
Frosted gray hair, exactly. What do you think is like particularly special about, because when you do a professional production of, let's say, Guys and Dolls, you rehearse it for like 3 weeks and then you put it up, and it's fast and it's furious. But in a high school version, you're working on the show for months. It's probably like 6 or 8 weeks of rehearsal and then tech or whatever. Do you think there's anything to be said that's special about doing a show like Guys and Dolls in that very particularly high school environment?
Off the top of my head, you have longer to sit with the roles, which potentially means, although you might not necessarily have as much rehearsal time as you would in a professional production over the course of 3 weeks, I do think that when you're in a professional production and the time is a little bit more condensed, you do have a little bit less room to kind of goof around, which is I think such a big piece of why that show is so great, is because it's so goofy. And I think that perhaps that is just a really ideal environment in which to explore that material. It could be what you were saying about, what a large ensemble the show really is. And so if you have that time to kind of build a camaraderie, I mean, I just can imagine it enriches the performance so much more. Which, especially when you're in high school and the kids are, the other people in it are your friends, and like you said, the backstage moments where you're goofing and joking around and having insane conversations. Not that that's not, true of certain, professional productions as well, but there is, when it becomes your job, it's your job, that's work.
No, I think that's all true. I have always believed in both community and high school theater as well as professional theater. But as you said, I think it's a little different with professional theater. It has to be, you're getting paid for it, that the backstage and the rehearsal process is just as important as the performance that the audience. And I totally agree with you that I personally think a show like Guys and Dolls, it's not necessarily only unique to Guys and Dolls, but a big, broad musical comedy that, as you said, allows for a big ensemble and lots of people, really lends itself to that experience.
Honestly,
I'm trying to think if I have any other fun memories.
I mean, it was just such an iconic moment in my high school life because it was the final show. Like, theater is what I did. It was the final show our senior year. We have this hilariously blurry photo of us dressed in our wedding attire right before the end of the show, backstage before we go on, and it's just I love that photo so much.
There are also some amazing pictures that maybe I'll throw up that I forget who took them, but they're from the balcony, so you can see the spike tape for the set is just so vivid. It's unbelievable. Well, thank you, Dan. This has been the best.
Katie, thank you for talking to a lowly, former actor like myself.
I mean, I talk to you all the time. Dan's one of my best friends. Yeah. But I should also say that it's a testament to, the bonds of high school theater and the bonding that happens on stage and off, especially in a show like Guys and Dolls, that Dan and I are so close today, almost 10 years later. In a year, it'll be 10 years later, which is
wow.
Well, thanks for chatting, and we'll go down memory lane again sometime soon, maybe. So now we've heard from Dan about some of the reasons why doing Guys and Dolls in high school is so special and why it can leave you with this deep and abiding lifelong love of the show. But we've also heard from him that I have a strong personal connection to the show and had one long before I did the show in high school. And we've danced around the issue sort of, but a lot of that has to do with my connection to the role of Adelaide. In fact, I wrote my college essay, my Common App essay, when I was applying to college about Adelaide, theorizing that there were two different types of people in the world, the Sarah Browns and the Miss Adelaides. We never really do get her last name ever. So I figured that I should give my perspective on that and try to talk about my personal key into the musical. As I said, my first exposure to the musical was listening to this 92 Revival cast recording in the car with my parents. And even from that age, I don't know, I must have been 4, 5, I almost had an alchemical reaction to her songs. I just felt like this deep connection, cosmic connection that I couldn't really explain between me and this role, but I'll try to explain now. First of all, I've always had, in case you didn't already realize, a sort of cartoonish voice and affect. And I'm funny and I like to make other people laugh, but I've never thought of myself as a clown per se. And in so many other musicals, the sort of secondary best friend, comic relief trope character that is the slot that Adelaide fills in this show is just that, is a clown, not a lot of depth, just there to back up the lead and make people laugh while they do it. The sort of da 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 I'm doing a lot of sound effects in this episode. But Adelaide is really unique, I think, in terms of that type of role, because in addition to being just side-splittingly funny and cartoonish, and, you know, she has the funny voice and the cold and everything, she also has this very deep plot, this romance, as Dan mentioned, and she really wears her heart and her soul on her sleeve, which gets me to my next point of connection to her, which is that she wears that heart on her sleeve, and she is relentless in the pursuit of her goals and her desires. And I think this is really, really unique in terms of female characters written for the stage. When I think about leading ladies in musical theater, men are always pursuing them. The things that they achieve just sort of fall into their lap, and then they do with them what they will. But in Guys and Dolls, Adelaide is the one who is pursuing Nathan. You know, Sky pursues Sarah, and Sarah is sort of resistant or neutral. For Adelaide, that's what she wants. And the whole show is her pursuing that goal. And this really connected to me when I was little, and I only started to unpack it now. And I think it's because, to quote another female artist whom I love and admire to death, Taylor Swift, I've never been a natural. All I do is try. And Adelaide made that trying, that try-hardness look okay, and not only just okay, but lovable. She was celebrated for it. She was glorious in her relentless pursuit of her desires and goals. And I think that's really rare, and leads me to my third point about Adelaide and the ways that she sort of defies expectations, especially in the musical theater mold, is that in addition to being funny and quirky and determined, a sort of stop-at-nothing self-starter, she's allowed to be sexy. And I also think you can't discount that. And I think most musical theater leading ladies are the sort of Sarah Brown type. They're beautiful and sort of unattainable, but never sexy. I think Sarah gets a little sexy when she's in Havana, but then sort of wisens up and goes back to being beautiful but unattainable for My Time of Day and I've Never Been in Love Before. But from the moment we meet Adelaide at the Hot Box, she is funny and quirky and weird, but she's also sexy as hell and revels in her power as a woman. And I think as a young girl who was always sort of a self-identified girly girl, as I was grappling with the mixed messages that I think young women are inundated with by society that tell us all of the things women and girls are either allowed or not allowed to be, you know, we're allowed to be beautiful, but not sexy. We're allowed to be pursued, but not to pursue. We're allowed to be smart, but, you know, not that smart. In Adelaide, I found this first role model who gave me permission to be myself in all of these contradictions, to be smart and sexy and powerful and vulnerable and determined and quirky and, of course, funny. And that's why I always say, probably next to Mama Rose and Gypsy and Dot and Sunday in the Park with George, Adelaide is the single most exciting role written for women in the musical theater canon. And I know that's a strong statement, but I really do stand by it for all of those reasons. One of the other things that I think is unique about Adelaide, but also many of the other roles in the play, the funny roles in the play, specifically Nathan Detroit and, you know, Harry the Horse and the like, is that I promised we would get back to the Damon Runyon source material. And I think something that's unique about the show that definitely comes from that source material, those short stories, is that I gotta say, the show feels Jewish. In many ways, it feels like broad vaudevillian Borscht Belt Yiddish theater. It feels like an extension of that and a celebration of that. Yiddish is peppered throughout the show. So new in so Sumi, Nathan is called a Schlemiel. many times. And I think as a young Jew, in addition to the ways as a young woman that the character of Adelaide made me feel powerful and sexy and celebrated in my womanhood, it also made me feel proud to be a Jewish person and funny and celebrated. And it felt like these characters were ones that I could own, that they could be part of my identities. And my last sort of personal key into why Guys and Dolls is so special. If you're playing Adelaide or one of the other funny, larger than life characters in the show, I think you're really doing what musical theater is at its best meant to do, which is produce joy, both for the audience and for the actor. I have never felt such unadulterated joy in my life more than when I was playing a role like Adelaide. You feel like you're making the audience forget whatever happened in their day or their week or even their year and just exist in the theatrical space together. And pursuing that feeling and that feeling itself have really gotten me through some tough patches in my life thus far. And for me, that's the really unique and the beautiful thing about musical theater that I return to at the end of the day. You know, we have all these art forms that explore tragedy and complication and nuance, and I think it's great when musical theater does that. But to me, musical theater is that unique art form that celebrates an overwhelming feeling of joy that you can't even speak anymore. You have to sing and then you have to dance. And in life, even when we're feeling that happy, most of us don't like walk down the street singing and dancing and going into, you know, a dance number. But how wonderful to go into the theater and see that feeling projected back for us and, you know, be able to identify it and say, that is why I live. It's that feeling. So I hope you have a better, or at least a broader understanding of Guys and Dolls after this episode. I'm hoping that the true Guys and Dolls heads will have learned something, or at least, you know, heard their own opinions parroted back to them, which I know is an enjoyable experience. Or for anybody who's always been quick to dismiss the show as sort of old-fashioned schlock, I hope you've come to appreciate it even a little bit more. I really do believe it is one of the canonical American texts, and like a great symphony or a great painting, it's something I've returned to again and again in my life that I expect to keep returning to. And every time I discover something new or something funny, something even funnier than the last time I saw it or listened to it, that makes me laugh all anew. So let me know if you enjoyed the formatting of this special episode. And thank you so much to my very special guests, the wonderful Robert Frost and Dan Froot. Next week, we will have off from call time, but the following week, we'll be back and better than ever with some amazing interviews. Thank you so much for watching. So new.